This week we're going to be looking at Little Malcolm and his struggle against the Eunuchs. It's Stuart Cooper's 1974 directorial debut. It's the story of Malcolm, who's a would-be revolutionary expelled from art school, as he and his followers Wick, Irwin and Nipple plan their revolution against the eunuchs of conformity. Malcolm is also struggling with his inability to actually act and do anything, and with his attraction to classmate Anne Gedge. So this is your first viewing?
Yeah, I'd never even heard of it, Matt, to be honest. When you suggested Little Malcolm and his struggle against the eunuchs, I was just like, what on earth are you talking about? It's a completely obscure British film, and yeah, it just really caught me by surprise. Yeah, I wasn't sure what to expect with a title like that. But yeah, first time I've seen it, I really liked it, to be honest. It's not an easy watch by any stretch, especially second viewing when you kind of know what all the ups and downs of the story. But, when a lot of the films that come out of this country are kind of postcards from Britain, it was nice to see something that was really a kind of deep look at the melancholic, bitter soul of Britain. I definitely feel like it captured that.
This was my first viewing too, although it sat on the shelf for 10 years. I came to this, and this is something I can't quite remember. I'd heard of Stuart Cooper's second film, Overlord.
Oh, yeah.
And picked up a cheap DVD of it and was blown away by it. And then it was subsequently released by Criterion, which was great because they now got a Blu-ray of it. And obviously, through investigating Stuart Cooper, had heard of this. And then, bang, like within a year or so, the BFI did a restoration and it came out on their Flipside label. So I duly snapped it up. And then it sat on the shelf until this year. That was like literally a decade of sitting on the shelf.
Well, that's the story of the film, though, isn't it? It's literally a film that has sat on the shelf for 4 decades, isn't it?
I felt like since it... I mean, we'll go into some of the background in a bit, but... yeah, I feel like I've really betrayed the film, adding an extra 10 years to its lack of audience. So this year I was going through like a massive pile of these films that sat on the shelf and just getting through them, making some amazing discoveries, and this is one of them. I watched this very early in the morning as the sun was coming up. So I was in that kind of completely open-minded, absorbing frame of mind, so I just took in the whole thing, and it was great. It was a more difficult watch the second time around. I think it's one of those films that you need one good receptive viewing of, and that'll give you the film. I mean, part of the reason that I watched Overlord and subsequently this is because of the technical credits on them. It was shot by John Alcott and edited by Ray Lovejoy, who are both, kind of Kubrick men. And I'll kind of watch anything that they've worked on.
Sure.
But I would like to discuss something as a sidebar, because when you look at the careers of John Alcott and Ray Lovejoy, you see they've got some real highs. They've got 2001,
yeah, definitely.
Clockwork Orange, Overlord, Barry Lyndon, The Shining. That's for John Alcott, and then Ray Lovejoy had The Ruling Class, Day in the Life of Joe Egg, Aliens, Batman. But then at the same time, he's also got Kroll and Sheena and Lost in Space. I'm wondering, and this is something I'm completely on the fence about, and would love to hear anyone else's opinion on it. I'm wondering if the Kubrick thing is a curse within the industry as well as a blessing, because we all kind of know from reading making ofs now that Kubrick, oversaw a lot of the photography himself.
Sure.
And actually, did it in terms of lighting and choosing lenses and everything really. So there is a feeling that the DOP is a technician, and that kind of extends to Eyes Wide Shut, where the DOP is listed literally as lighting cameraman.
Yeah.
And the same with Ray Lovejoy, because Kubrick literally hands-on edited a lot of his films and would have somebody to help. I wonder if there isn't that feeling in the industry that gives people a good rep, but prevents them from being the titans that they could be. If that Kubrick tag holds people back a bit.
I don't know. Yeah, I know what you're saying. I could see how that, might be a curse, but I also think Kubrick's renowned for not suffering fools, and I think somebody that was just a, skilled and experienced technician and didn't contribute anything to the vision, I think he would lose patience quite quickly with someone like that. I think he needs, like Arthur C. Clarke on 2001, he needs somebody that's on his level for him to just kind of almost proofread what he's doing, to sort of,
Yeah,
to be a good second, a good lieutenant commander as he walks into battle. I think, I think he would want strong vision beside him.
good point. Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
But saying that, I did. I think I sent it to you, that documentary from American cinematographer on John Alcott.
Yeah, when
And
he's working
he's
on
on,
Vice Squad.
yeah, and well, also we see John Alcott behind the scenes on a film that he's working on in Los Angeles, and the light's beautiful, and the sets look really kind of amazing. There's a whole village built on stilts, and the costumes look great, and they're engineering this shot with a dog walking through the corpses after a massacre, and it just looks fantastic. And I was scratching my head trying to work out what it was without checking IMDb, and I'm not a huge fan of the fantasy genre, but I think like Conan the Barbarian is a really great example, and I was thinking maybe it's on that kind of standard. And then I looked it up, and it was Beastmaster, which I've never seen, but it was on Amazon, so I started watching it out of loyalty to, the documentary, and to see what this master of cinematography had done before, and it was shonky
Really?
as hell. Yeah. I bailed after about 15 minutes.
Okay.
I was really like, wow, what is this? So
Okay, so back to Little Malcolm. Should you do a quick bit of background?
yeah. Just while we're quickly talking about the crew, I just wanted to mention the assistant director was Kip Gowans, who was also the assistant director on Never Let Go and Downhill Racer.
Oh, okay.
So we have a little Kip Gowans season going on.
I just want to flag up something I only saw because I was reading the booklet for the Blu-ray, which has got lots and lots of really good informative articles in it. The art director for Little Malcolm was Edward Marshall, who did Room at the Top for Jack Clayton, and
Right, nice.
Charlie Bubbles, which is kind of it's on the shelf as a future contender for this podcast.
Okay.
It was Albert Finney's one directorial movie, and it's pretty
cool.
interesting.
Yeah, just a sort of interesting background to this project. It seems like Stuart Cooper was here as an actor first. It looked like he got a one of the only Americans to get a scholarship to RADA. There's half a dozen, I think. And in his class were Anthony Hopkins, just graduating. You had John Hurt and David Warner. I think Mike Lee was maybe in one of the years below him or something. So they're all kind of there and connected. And I think Halliwell was in their class too, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Mike Lee had said that Halliwell was one of those confrontational and argumentative types, and that apparently he kept a raincoat on for a whole year after the headmaster at his college told him to take it off.
Brilliant. I know somebody like that, and they were as successful in life as Malcolm.
Yeah, me too. I was at film school with somebody exactly like that as well. He was really kind of vocal about his anarchic ambitions, but anytime one of the tutors addressed him directly, he was very much like, "Yes, sir, no, sir, 3 bags full, sir." It was always a little bit disappointing to see him kind of cowed like that.
Halliwell originally wrote it as a long play, and it was produced in a 6-hour version by Mike Lee, starring Halliwell as Malcolm. Apparently he was very, very difficult to direct and very averse to cuts.
I had one other note about David Halliwell. Apparently a working title, or a title that he liked for this project, was called One Long Wank.
I'm surprised, I guess it's a theatre play, I'm surprised there isn't more reference to wanking and masturbation and sexual fantasy, since that is kind of like about 30% of the inner life of a lonely 20-year-old.
Yeah, I read a fairly recent interview with Mike Lee, and he said the uncut version of the play is about 15 hours and one of the best pieces of writing he's ever read.
That initial run ground to a halt very quickly, and then it was chopped down to 2 hours for a run in the West End with John Hurt and, according to a poster I've seen online, Rodney Bewes, who must possibly have played Irwin. George Harrison saw that version and loved it, and in one of his very earliest film ventures put his own money into producing it.
I read two different versions of this as well. So one version says that it's his money, and the second version says that it's the profits from
Yellow Submarine.
Yellow Submarine. Yeah, that's it. So, and I think that's how it ended up getting kind of just tied up in legal limbo when the Beatles split and all their kind of assets, were all kind of seized, weren't they?
After it got caught up in that legal nonsense, they did get dispensation to take it to the Berlin Film Festival, where it won a Silver Bear, I think in 1974. But then, the heat from the film had died down, and it literally sat on a shelf forever until 2010, 2011.
Literally just shelved and forgotten.
According to the technical details on the Blu-ray, it's held by the George Harrison estate. They're the ones who released the negative for the new scan.
And let's not forget, George Harrison was a major player in the British film landscape in the 80s as well, with handmade films. He made Mona Lisa, Long Good Friday. Yeah,
and I feel bad that I left it, almost 10 years between buying the flip side Blu-ray and finally sitting down to watch it. I feel like I've contributed to that loss somehow.
We didn't have a podcast 10 years ago, so you wouldn't have had anyone to tell.
I could have told you.
Oh yeah, that's true.
So we open with Malcolm sitting alone in his freezing, I'm assuming, judging by the state of the building, they're living in a squat. In his freezing squat in winter in Oldham, willing himself to get up and get out of bed.
Okay. Now! Oh, blast it! Now! Done it! Self-mastery, that. Oh, it's cold. What a life. What a marvellous life for a man like me.
And I think this kind of sets the tone. Obviously, it's based on a play, and it has a kind of slight theatricality to the dialogue and the performances. Stuart Cooper said that he didn't want to kind of gussy up the material too much. He just wanted to let the kind of the beauty and the skill of the writing come through and just kind of illuminate it slightly.
Yeah, I think it's so well balanced as an adaptation of a theatrical piece that you feel the landscape and the world around them, but it doesn't feel like they've deliberately tried to translate it into something else. It just feels...
My note on the page is the lighting and decor are a pleasure.
Yeah, but what I love is, a theatrical adaptation. They could have easily just ignored the outside world, and the photography just balances out the exposure so that you can see the texture of the city outside of the windows. When they spend so much time in the squat, you still feel it. And I think there's even a couple of contra zooms in there, very, very kind of subtle ones where the background just is creeping forwards and is a little bit oppressive. I think it's really, really nicely done.
In a similar vein, I really like there's a few kind of brief cuts across the road to the art school where you can see kind of Wick inside the cafeteria and Irwin leaving to come over and see Malcolm, and they're just like really, really nice little, just brief moments that open the world out for you.
Yeah.
And beautiful sort of contrast of lighting, those lovely sort of warm interiors inside the art school. And I love Irwin's red scarf, which contrasts with everything around him all the time.
Really nice. Yeah, it's great. In this opening scene, Malcolm gets himself out of bed and his friends come to visit him and talk about how he's been expelled from art school. And I think that happened to Halliwell as well, didn't it? He was expelled from art school.
Briefly, in 1959 apparently, and then he was readmitted.
He still bears a grudge 2 decades later. But what I love about those two guys is that they've come up with this idea of showing their loyalty and camaraderie and their solidarity with Malcolm Screwdike by creating secret signals to give him sort of subtle winks whenever they're close by, and he's like, "You spineless bastards! No, all we're going to do is start a revolution, start a war," and they quickly accept that as their new reality. I think that's he's quite convincing, isn't he?
So then they leave and go through the freezing dark streets and catch a very vintage bus to the pub. I noticed when they enter, George Harrison is on the jukebox. George Harrison, he does like to insert his music into any film.
Well, I guess he's paying for it, isn't he?
Yeah. where they scheme to form a political party. And it's quite interesting that when they're doing this, they're quite upfront about the fact that it has nothing to do with any genuine political ideas or desire to make the world better. It's, as they say, in order to do all the things we've always dreamed about and achieve absolute power.
If only politicians were so honest nowadays.
But this scene in the pub is one of those ones where, well, I mean, I'd already kind of oohed and ahed over a few things in the first scene, but in this, there's just some lovely low-key shots. The shot of Irwin with those kind of like soft focus kind of light refresh. Oh, it's just unshowy but amazing. We also get to see Anne Gedge, who is the object of Malcolm's distant affection. There's a brilliant line in Lucky Jim, Kingsley Amos's book Lucky Jim, about somebody who has a crush on somebody who's never ever going to make a move, and he says all he's capable of doing is looking palely across the room at her, and that's Malcolm. Although apparently he's supposed to have a date with her tonight and has forgotten about it.
I think that his kind of impotence is part of the subtext for his character, isn't it? All the way through, you know, he talks tough, but anytime he's alone with Anne, he's a powerless little boy, isn't he? Well, in fact, all three of them don't really know how to communicate to women, and I think their sort of Party of Dynamic Erection is them trying to muster their own
maleness amongst themselves. We learn here that Malcolm's been kicked out of art school, although he does say earlier on that it's been 5 years of dossing about, and I think it's Allard who's the guy, the tutor who's kicked him out, becomes the subject of their petty grudge, which is the basis for the whole film.
I love it that we never see him in the whole film as well. I think that's just a really nice touch that he is this sort of mythical figure. But as you listen to the other characters, you do sense that Allard's probably all right. He's probably a decent teacher who's just at his wit's end. In fact, don't they even say at one point, look, you can just go back if you want?
Yeah. Malcolm takes the bus home and bumps into Anne Gedge. I would just like to drop a slightly creepy note in here just to say that this is Rosalind Ayres is one of my biggest screen crushes, and I've seen 3 films this year.
Really?
Yeah, she's in That'll Be the Day, which I watched recently. Well, watched again recently, and she's in this, which is a pleasant surprise. And she was also in the movie version of The Lovers, the Jack Rosenthal sitcom, which was made into a movie a few years later. And she plays a young, sexually hungry young woman in that, which was...
You're right.
Yeah. It was a dreadful film, but she's in that too. I've seen 3 films with her purely by chance that she's in this year.
Yeah, I mean, she's fantastic. It's a really well-written character as well, because she does start off as just like the prize, doesn't she? This sort of doe-eyed, gorgeous, fawning, patient, angel, and by the end, she really kind of has some fire, and
she completely creates her own agency, doesn't she?
Yeah, she has her own voice, and the sort of feminist frustration at being always parked second to the men. I think all of that comes through crystal clear. Her arc really caught me by surprise that it wasn't just another sort of second fiddle female for the men to ogle.
And you do worry with a film that's kind of it doesn't obviously agree with the things they're saying, but it is quite indulgent and it does like its characters. You worry that she's just going to be that kind of, we're going to see everything through their gaze and nothing else.
But what's nice is it does that, but then it sort of turns it on its head right in the third act, and we see all of the characters through her gaze as she articulates her contempt for them and her frustration and boredom at all of their kind of thoughts and decisions.
And it was really good watching it the second time round. You do actually get a lot more, even in Anne's early scenes, you can see things through her eyes. Like this conversation that we're going to talk about next, where he goes for coffee at Anne's late at night. You can see that she's kind of quietly tolerating his eccentricities while she's trying to get through to him.
And now he's just acting the fool, isn't he? He's acting kind of like he forgot they were supposed to be going to the cinema, and it looks like he's forgotten how to talk to her.
Yeah, I do like Malcolm in the coffee scene, he kind of is quite vulnerable. But then when he kind of brings his self-pity up as a defense, it's like, all I want to do is be treated like a human being. It's like...
Yeah, she's treating him like a human being. She's already doing it.
Yeah, and because he overthinks everything that he says and does, he's just unable to do anything naturally and even have a conversation when there's just two of them in the room.
Yeah, that's it. There's one nice device, which I think they kind of lose about halfway through the film, but where he's talking to himself, and it's like he's realising the mistakes that he's making and just trying to put himself back on the correct path.
Fuck the party. If I could bring this off, if I could get Anne, that would be my real conquest, not all this dynamic crap. I'll get her. After all, I know I'm a great man.
And it's brilliant that after that, you know, he says, after all, I'm a great man, and then you do a hard cut to, no, you're wrong, which is the ridiculous, pedantic argument with Nipple about the jacket and the corduroy.
Yeah, I mean, again, this is a great piece of writing, because I think if you get that kind of exchange between two pedantic characters, if you get that wrong, it would be excruciating to watch. But it's quite funny, and it's desperate, and you know, you really feel like they're both jockeying for supremacy in this argument, and neither of them are going to let it go, which is nice.
I do like the fact that we go straight from like one of Malcolm's few, you know, genuine moments of insight where he's taking a realistic look at himself, well, semi-realistic, and then you cut to this sort of pissing about that wastes his entire life. All of this kind of nonsense argument and rhetoric.
It's nice though, because it shows that Nipple isn't one of those guys that just blindly follows Malcolm. You know, he if Nipple believes he's right, he'll stand his ground, and this kind of pays off nicely later on, where Malcolm puts Nipple on trial, doesn't he? Nipple's
almost as bad as Malcolm. He's doing this thing. I've got this note here where you've got this repeated rewriting of your kind of exclusion as a kind of sought out outsider status, as if
that's it.
You know, the fact that you're an outcast because you're a Muppet is something that you've sought out, and it's a choice. It's a choice, yeah.
I love. He has that monologue later on where he's talking about meeting a girl at a party and how wild their sexual liaison was, and then Malcolm's like, "I was there, mate." that's not what happened. It's a really nice put down.
There's a really nice touch in here where Nipple starts going into one of his, because Nipple's a would-be writer, and he's actually he's quite good with words. Yeah,
he's really sort of sensory, isn't he?
Yeah, his storytelling's really good, but he goes into his kind of story about when he starved himself and moved into a hallucinatory state, and it's really carefully shot, just a slow creep in on him, and there's some really, really subtle sound design coming in the background just to emphasise it. Then Wick and Erin return, and we start to get some of the party politics going on, don't we? It
was when we get to the first Hail Screwdyke, which I think when they took the play to Broadway, that's what it was called, was Hail Screwdyke instead of Little Malcolm. I made a note that it felt very much like a pantomime. It has, when they're first talking about the party and the salutes and planning the kidnapping, it definitely feels like a pantomime. Like they all of them know they're not going to go through with it, but they're enjoying living in that sort of fantasy mind space where you can just do anything. You know, when you're playing, when it's make-believe, you can play at kidnapping and revolution and all of these things.
And it's interesting that when they're talking about and kind of planning and enacting their kidnap, it just kind of underlines the fact that, you know, they're talking about something quite dangerous and illegal and political and would be revolutionary, but they are just like a bunch of kids playing in a ruined car. And
I mean, that's such a wonderful scene. Such a really well executed sequence. Love that.
The way that they're talking to each other as well and explaining what they're doing. I mean, I used to do that when I was a little kid. When you were making up games and playing in the woods, you'd explain what happens next as it was happening.
Yeah. And I remember sitting on the swings with friends when I was about 9 or 10 years old, and we'd talk about how we used to jump off the swings and do somersaults, and one guy made up a story about breaking his own leg, and you just kind of run with it all, don't you? Because your imagination's fevered and wild, and it's, you know, it just feels like they're really enjoying that playtime. I love the fact that they're going to change all the calendars to have their names for the months, and they decide that they're going to do the kidnapping on Screwdyke the 9th. It's all of those silly things that you just... Yeah, it's intoxicating, and as you're watching it, you know, you do just go along with them. Oh yeah, fuck it, I'd love to be running around with them, you know, planning a kidnapping. It's really exciting.
I've been thinking, we need a new calendar. We need new names for the months.
Yeah, that's a great idea, man. Anyway, we could give them our names.
Exactly. So this month becomes the month of Screwdyke, March becomes Wick, April Irwin, and May Nipple.
Nipple. You can't call a month Nipple. You'll have to change your name.
I'm not changing my name.
And the movie kind of gets into the mood of it as well. You got those little silly bits of, you know, theatrical lighting. You know, we're there kind of quote in the car and driving away with Allard, and then they're at a red light, and you get the red light.
It's really good. It's lovely. The guy in the back as well. He's so good at doing all the car noises as they're driving along. It has that Dogville feel to it, doesn't it? Where the kind of commitment and conviction of the cast bring it into reality in your imagination.
Stop at the end.
Straight round the corner.
Not past Sparrow Park.
Stop at the traffic light!
There aren't any traffic lights there.
There are.
Their plan for the kidnap is something to like causing a distraction by stealing a painting from a gallery.
They're going to steal a Stanley Spencer painting, and they're going to kidnap Allard and get him to tear up the painting so that
get him to destroy it. That's right.
Yeah, get him to destroy the painting so that he'll obviously take the blame for that and be an outcast.
Yeah, it's a mad plan, isn't it? Sort of when you say it out loud, it doesn't make any sense, but it seems like it makes a lot of sense to them.
The kidnapping moves to this amazing kind of semi-derelict hall, another of the locations. We haven't mentioned, have we? It was shot in Oldham, in the strike-deserted buildings of the gas board.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so they got this whole enormous building as kind of a location and production base, which is why you've got all those different, you know, different areas of it, like what they use as the courtroom and the rooms they use as their squat.
I went to Oldham about 15 years ago, and I think it pretty much looks the same.
It's the subject of Ellis Lowry's paintings, which is something I didn't know until this morning, but I thought the wonderful bits in the snow later on looked like Lowry paintings. All those
beautiful
cityscape shots. When the kidnapping progresses into the hall, you get some more imaginative framing and camera movement and some really good subtle music under Malcolm's rant.
So Wick is standing in for Allard as they rehearse their kidnap plan, and when Malcolm rants at him, I love that it feels like something he's constructed in his mind and is finally able to vent, and he just pours it out, this kind of rage, the vitriol in there, and the focus on Allard. I thought that was really kind of terrifying and mesmerising.
There's really good subtle use of music in this. I think it's Stanley Myers, who's kind of like a regular on the kind of British low-budget thriller scene at the time. Did the music for The Deer Hunter later on as well.
Oh, wow.
Following scene is Nipple winding up Malcolm about Anne Gedge, is my note, and then he goes into his ridiculous, fanciful story about picking up a stereotype curvy African woman at a party.
He says her dress is as tight as a drum skin.
With subtle use of tribal music underneath. My main note from this, though, is another of those kind of moments of self-realisation or self-understanding. It's like, what will we do when we're in power? And it's like, nothing.
Nothing,
We just want power for its own sake.
What are our aims? Nothing. Nothing at all. Soaring pyramids to nothing, I think he says, doesn't he?
The next scene is another scene with Anne.
Yeah, so this is when he walks past her house, and he's kind of, again, trying to motivate himself to just grow up and focus on, you know, what's real in life, and, you know, talk to Anne and just be nice.
I did find that quite sympathetic. I did do a bit of walking past the girl I like's house when I was 20 as well.
Oh, yeah.
And he kind of accidentally bumps into her, and they go to the club to see a couple of very, very 70s bands.
Yeah. There's a nice moment here where he starts to talk about the agenda for the Party of Dynamic Erection, and she listens for a minute or two and then just gets up and goes and sits somewhere else, Like, it isn't even worth engaging with.
I thought that she just got up to go and watch the band, and he could quite easily have gone with her to watch the band, with it being a gig, but he just sat there stewing.
Felt like their table was kind of close enough. She only moved like 2 tables forward.
And then the film takes a drastic visual turn because it starts snowing, and it looks amazing.
It really buckets it down, doesn't it?
Yeah, but from going from these dank gasboard building interiors, which, they're all beautifully photographed in shades of brown and grey and orange and beige, but then you go to these crisp white landscapes with touches of blue, and then there's Irwin.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's it. It's like a beautiful blanket, isn't it, of white.
Yeah, I put Lowry-esque, but then that was completely cancelled out by the fact that Lowry actually did paint Oldham. And you get Wick's impromptu speech, and then this whole thing is like a kind of semi-theatrical thing with Malcolm going into a slightly more serious rant.
Oh, his Hale Screwdike speech. I love this speech because it has that thing. It's not well thought out, and it's repetitive, and it's vague. The obvious comparison is with Hitler, but his speeches were so like razor focused that this just feels more like Trump than Hitler.
Everywhere I looked, I saw decadence, apathy, cynicism, and decay. And try as I might, I could not rid myself of the spectre that haunted me. The spectre of a dying culture. Materially fat, but completely lacking in all the spiritual direction, promise, and aspiration which made our race great over the millennia.
I think he does take it quite seriously, though. This is his kind of refuge from the frustrations of the real world. And in fact, he ends with "I offer you dignity," which is the one thing that he kind of can't have. He kind of craves genuine dignity and to be able to respect himself, but he can't do that because he can't attain anything, because he doesn't do anything.
Yeah, exactly.
I think this is probably the turning point between Malcolm and Nipple, and I think that's because Malcolm's taking this quite seriously, and Nipple thinks he's still playing games and comes out with his assassination attempt.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Here I
He's got a gun!
Yeah, and it returns to boys playing games, where I think for Malcolm it was something getting a bit more serious now for him.
So Nipple talks about the assassination, and they talk about chasing the assassin and apprehending him, and they say that Nipple can't even run, and he's adamant that he can run. He says, "Of course I can run," and then they do a foot chase, and he just has this really kind of gangly, slow run. It's really funny to watch, and Owen is like a whip. It just chases him down, piles him into the snow, and beats him up. There's a lovely kind of a moment where they roll down the hill as in the snow. It's really good, like one of those cinematic adaptations that definitely lifts it beyond the stage play. It looks so beautiful.
Congratulations, Owen. You have successfully saved my life.
And you're dead.
No. I escaped.
How could you possibly have escaped? I mean, how old of you?
Well, he wouldn't have had a chance to do all that if it was for real. I'd just fire at point blank range, and in the confusion I'd just run away.
You can't run.
Of course I can run.
Should we talk a little bit about John Hurt?
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, he was 34 when he made this film.
Yes, and he looks it as well.
Well, yeah, but I mean, whenever you've seen him outside of this film, he looks even much older. This is the youngest I think I've ever seen him on screen.
Yeah, he's one of those people. He's like Ian Holm, who's always sort of timelessly about 50 for me. Except obviously for when they get very, very old and suddenly they're just old men in films. It's a slight stretch of the imagination. John Hurt, less so, because he's got quite a young, innocent face. It's more of a stretch for David Warner. David Warner is kind of a 20-year-old student. And I remember the casting thinking, what's going on?
Yeah, I think they played both the characters on stage, didn't they? So that's how they carried it over. But yeah, I thought they were pretty convincing as, well, maybe not as teenagers, but early 20-somethings who maybe, it's the 70s, maybe they're smoking too much and certainly not getting any sunlight up north and not getting enough exercise. I thought they were all right.
I don't know what to say beyond that.
Well, I mean, it's John Hurt, isn't it? You kind of have to take a pause to acknowledge his incredible body of work and kind of lifelong career on screen. It's pretty staggering, isn't it? I think the breadth of work that he's done and his constant presence in cinema. I had like a loose John Hurt anecdote, which was when I was at film school, there was a person in the year below me who had got John Hurt to be in one of their student films. And apparently he was well known for any time he wasn't working on some proper professional shoot, he'd be hanging around film schools working with students and just lending them as much of his time as he could spare. And apparently he was, quite well known for doing that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, tons of student films. He's in, like from the 90s to the noughties. He's in, loads.
What was the motivation for that, do you think? Just enjoyment of doing it and helping out? Or do you think it was...
I think so, yeah, just balance, I think,
I remember reading, as part of his, one of the many obituary type articles and recollections of him, that obviously he's a heavy drinker and used to spend a lot of his time in pubs in Soho. And people who'd encountered him said, he's extremely affable and would chat all evening. As long as you're not talking about films and his career, he'd be happy to talk all night.
Oh my God, how would you not ask him about Alien or, Elephant Man? How could you not bring it up?
And David Warner.
It's fairly established at this
point. Yeah,
that's
what I was going to say. He's
done 2 films with Peckinpah.
Yeah, and he's established, verging on hot. He's kind of... I don't mean sort of sexually hot. I mean like as a hot actor. He'd already kind of been a kind of edgy kind of semi-star in Morgan, A Suitable Case for Treatment and that sort of thing in the late 60s. It's quite interesting to see him in such a small film.
I think it must be just getting the band back together, all those guys that were students together, finally getting a chance to make a movie together, playing characters that they know inside out. This is what John Hurt. I can't think of any way to cram in Snowpiercer, and Hellboy, and V for Vendetta, and that brilliant cameo that he had in The Proposition, The Osterman Weekend, Heaven's Gate. Like, I just want to say the words out loud, even if I just end up cutting them out. Time Bandits for David Warner. Should we say Time Bandits? Tron.
The Omen.
Cross of Iron.
Star Trek's 5 and 6.
He plays different characters, doesn't he?
Yeah.
He's in The Next Generation as well, isn't he?
They do a lot of that in Star Trek, having actors pop up in different roles throughout the different iterations.
I guess they never expected people to see them again.
Go back.
Following this, Malcolm is loitering outside Anne's again and loses his nerve, just can't go up to the door and knock. And then he's back at his digs, desperately urging himself to do something, at which point he discovers the kind of the office, big office, what looks like a council chambers, which then becomes his courtroom for the show trial for Nipple.
Another great scene because it goes from being quite comedic and farcical to very serious, and as you're watching it, you feel the blood drain out of you because it just feels like, oh my God, they're going to go too far. And there's a wonderful moment towards the end of that where even Nipple says, look, you're my friend, now's a really good time to stop this.
The second time I watched this is just a little caveat. The second time I watched this, it was when I began to feel that watching a stage adaptation sometimes felt like that. I think it's probably because I'd seen it felt more spontaneous the first time around, but second time around you can feel the construction of the scene. You realise, okay, I have landed at the beginning of a scene and it's going to play out slowly and steadily in this way, in the way that a piece of careful theatrical writing would.
That's it. It's completely self-contained, isn't it?
Yeah, but that wasn't such a good thing for me second time round. I mean, I really like the whole scene. I really like the fact that at the end you can see there is some genuine feeling for Malcolm. He is feeling what Nipple's saying, but he just can't allow his self-esteem to drop.
Yeah, that's it.
And I've seen
another failure.
Yeah, that is a very male thing. I've seen it not only in myself, but certainly in other people in my life in ways that have wrecked their lives. And I think this is one of the turning points for Malcolm.
It's so stubborn, isn't he?
Yeah, he just cannot allow that sense of dignity and self to drop and allow something into his life that way. And immediately following Nipple's show trial and expulsion, we have the climactic visit. Anne pays Malcolm a surprise visit. She's wearing a really nice denim outfit.
Yeah.
Lovely shirt.
Yeah.
Malcolm's still talking about the mission, which is the kidnapping of Allard, which is supposed to happen tonight. And Anne is kind of quietly and patiently disdainful of the nonsense that he's talking.
Yeah, I mean, we feel her just kind of, again, being patient, but really running running out of patience as well. You can see it bubbling up and comes right to the surface, and she kind of...
And I think she's thought through what she wants to say to him, but she's just kind of testing the water.
She gives him so many opportunities to stop his delusion and just
engage.
Snap back into the real world.
And then when she's kind of reached the end of her tether, she just decides to try, I guess I wouldn't say it was a ploy, but just to try a different tactic with him that she's been considering, which is just to say to him, how would you like to fuck me? Just confront him directly with a sexual offer that she knows that he's never going to be able to take.
A lot of it is about his kind of impotence and this idea that she can just like directly engage with that and say, okay, if this is what you want, if you want a kind of the Party of Dynamic Erection, if you want freedom to fuck and to, you know, be a man, then let's have a look at that and see what that looks like. And instead of him responding to it, he just is like a total prude, isn't he? He's outraged by her behaviour, and that's it. He's like a Victorian stereotype. Doesn't she say something about that? What does she say? Don't tell me there's a Victorian gentleman lurking beneath that angry young muck. Such a good line. It like nails him completely, doesn't it?
But it's not even then it's not even a heartfelt response. You know, he isn't a conservative, he isn't a prude. It's just another front that he has to put on to kind of deal with it.
He's powerless, isn't he?
Yeah, and to avoid actually digging into his own feelings and reactions to it. He tells him he's got the biggest front, and she goes into a speech that absolutely nails him and all of his friends.
But also it's that thing, you know, when you are young and, you know, other people seem really mysterious and, you know, like they have a whole internal life that you don't know anything about, and you're really kind of curious about other people. And then when you get close, you realize there's, you know, not everybody has that kind of depth or, you know, interest beneath the surface. They're just kind of treading water almost, and he is definitely one of those people. Yeah,
I used to have half of that when I was like 18, 19. I was like incredibly shy with girls and with women. And this wasn't a conscious thing, and I have to state that I wasn't like deliberately trying to compensate for it in the way that Malcolm does by building up this front. But people thought that I was kind of self-possessed, and cool is the wrong word, but people thought that I was self-possessed and in control and just a bit aloof. But the fact was that I was just completely unable to speak to girls naturally.
And I thought you were much more interesting than you actually are.
That's exactly it. I mean, obviously that continues to this day, but that was something that happened to me, and I can totally sympathise with it. But Malcolm just doesn't. Again, he does something that I've seen in other people that I don't do, which is he just kind of reverts to this self-manufactured self-esteem. And you can see it in this scene as well, when he gets his breath back and starts to get his motor running again. He just reverts into this fantasy land and turns nasty.
He's responding to what she said. He's not really listening, is he? He's just kind of defending himself against the words instead of actually letting the words sink in and making that important change.
And at this point, Wick and Erwin arrive to carry out the kidnapping. It's really difficult to kind of get into, because the scene turns quite subtly. It
does, yeah. I mean, it's again a clever piece of writing that it pivots, and we know from the show trial of Nipple that the gang can kind of turn on somebody that they would think was an ally, and I think Malcolm accuses her of being a spy, doesn't he? Sent by Allard, and they sort of jump on that idea as justification to kind of turn on her. Don't they?
That's the thing. I know that this scene is about, well, the film is about kind of the impotence of these men, but I don't think that impotence in itself is what makes them turn nasty. I think it's kind of it's that crossed with the fact that they are just about to let their revolutionary fantasies turn into a fairly violent reality, and it is something real for them. You know, Wick thinks it's really going to happen. This kidnapping's going to happen, and it's because Anne seems, you know, she has offended them and their masculinity, but she also kind of threatens their fantasy plan, which is their compensation for that.
Yeah.
You know, she is actually a threat to their terrorist act.
Yeah, I mean, it does also. It has that sort of slightly familiar schoolyard bullying atmosphere and tone to it. So as they turn on her, you know, it definitely feels like kids just picking on one person, choosing one person and annihilating them, and they go straight in, don't they? They talk about punishing her, don't they, for her kind of insolence and for threatening their plans.
Yeah, that's right. And it actually turns violent. They kind of beat her up, and then it becomes a kind of sexualized beating as well, when Wick kind of parts her legs and kicks her in the groin.
It's so brutal, that, isn't it?
Yeah, it's hideous.
A lot of it's been really subtle, but this, you just watch the sort of the frenzy of it.
I did think, again, I'm just nitpicking, I did think the theatrical moment that she's dead didn't feel necessary, because you can tell the difference between a dead person and a living person, even if you're in shock about it, and it did feel like a bit of an unnecessary twist.
Because they beat her up, she drops to the floor, and then they all turn away, don't they, and just leave her there on the ground.
I think she's dead, and then she kind of revives and manages to get away. Malcolm can't even acknowledge the fact that they've beaten her. He's kind of like, oh, the whole thing was feigned. He's playing it as if she was, as if she was pretending the whole thing when they were beating her up.
The first two acts have a really giddy kind of unpredictability to them, and that carries on into the third act, but it's so sobering there, the way they treat Anne, and the way she crawls, on her hands and knees to freedom. All of that stuff, man, it really kind of, it's the feeling you're left with is just, it feels hopeless, doesn't it, and exhausting, and, heartbreaking, and
all of that kind of energy and enjoyment's curdled into this one moment, hasn't it?
And because you are kind of sympathetic to him and his impotency and shyness, and you like the other characters. Wick is kind of a little bit of a dummy, but quite sort of handsome and charming in his own way, and Owen feels a little bit kind of in the closet, and it's quite cute and just like talented. He paints anyway, so basically you have these three characters that you kind of like in spite of their delusion, and then after you see them act like this, it just pulls the rug out, man. You're just kind of left utterly deflated by the film. Yeah, she escapes, and then Malcolm's talking about the plan still, that it doesn't change anything, that they can still do the kidnapping and finish their terrorist act.
Yeah, and there's a really nice bit of symmetry between this last scene and the very first scene, is where Malcolm's trying to will himself into action again and counting down to literally a countdown to will himself to make the kidnap happen, but when the moment arrives, as Wick says, he hasn't got the nerve.
We're not going to do it. After what he's just made us do to that girl. After what he's just said. When the moment arrives, he hasn't got the nerve. Look at him. Petrified. The great leader. That miserable lump of solidified crap transfixed there. All this for nothing.
He doesn't even finish the countdown, does he?
Yeah, and at this point, his friends are completely disillusioned in him and their worship of him and the things that it's made them do. And you leave Malcolm in one of those... it's a technique I really like. There's a really good one at the end of Passion of Anna by Ingmar Bergman, where you leave the lead character wandering around in a kind of semi-crazed state of mind, except it's a very wide shot, and there's an optical zoom in and in and in and in and in until the picture starts to degrade. And that's what you get on our final kind of portrait of Malcolm, and then a freeze on that. And that's where we leave Malcolm.
And I had one other note, which was about that kind of urban legend of Adolf Hitler coming to visit his brother. Was it Alois Hitler, that lived in Liverpool with his English wife? And I think it was Grant Morrison and Steve Yoel that did a project for Deadline or Crisis.
It's Crisis.
Yeah, called... Is it The Secret Life of Adolf Hitler or something? I think
it was
like
the Adventures of a Young Adolf Hitler or something like that, wasn't it?
Yeah, and it sort of pitches this premise that if he'd have been successful as an artist, as a painter, that would have been enough for him, and he maybe wouldn't have, gone on to, rule Austria, Germany, and
Yeah.
so on and so forth.
Ruined the 20th century.
Yeah,
Is
essentially.
The New Adventures of Hitler.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
The New Adventures.
Apparently it first appeared in a Scottish magazine, Cut, and then I think Crisis started serialising it just before it folded.
Yeah, and I think you definitely get some of that with Malcolm, you know, that maybe if he'd have been recognised by his tutor as a great artist of the 20th century, maybe he wouldn't have gone all kind of manic.
Yeah, I mean, that's the key to Malcolm, isn't it? He doesn't do anything, he finds it impossible to integrate or to do anything out in the real world, so he can only live in his own world, can't he? And
all of his paintings, I mean, they don't make a big point of it, but when you sort of see around his squat, they're all
self-portraits,
paintings of himself. Yeah, that's it.
They have the same power fantasies as a lot of young men. You know, if I could do this, if I could have the power, if I could,
sure.
if I could assert myself, is basically the thing, rather than you know. And I don't think they're being held back in any kind of class-based kind of way. I think it's purely about maleness and male impotence and male need to if you can't be accepted and work as an equal, you want to dominate, and I think that ties into some of the things that we were discussing before we started recording, when you were saying that it reminded you of who?
All right, I talked about Dominic Cummings and Nigel Farage and these kind of politicians that seem to have kind of petty, bitter grievances. With something, I hate Europe, and that's enough to kind of destroy, 50 years of carefully curated international diplomacy. That's enough. It seems like Dominic Cummings hates poor people.
Yeah, Cummings seems to be one of those strange men who cannot tolerate being told what to do, so wants to remove any system of oversight or any system of what he sees as bureaucracy.
Well, I think he also sees himself as a great visionary for the future, and has this dream of sculpting out, a world. But I also think, we're off on a tangent here, but there's all these kind of ideas that he's just another one of Putin's spies placed into the British government to guide it to Putin's vision. So really, Cummings is just a puppet.
Yeah, or a useful idiot who's so intent on dismantling safeguards that he's letting in something that he doesn't understand the power of.
Yeah, he's the archetypal middleman.
I will definitely recommend it to people based on its visual qualities. I think, as you've said, it might be a bit of a tough sell to people because it's based on a play, and it is quite theatrical, and the pacing's quite theatrical, and it is fairly grim.
It's one of those films. As soon as I saw it and had finished it, I forwarded it on and recommended it to a couple of friends. It's not very often you see a film that is about that kind of truthful, bitter Britishness, for a film to kind of challenge the masculinity of its male audience and to make them consider how we interact with each other. I don't know, I just felt like it was really a sort of arresting presentation of male stuff.
Male stuff.
Male stuff.
That's a good headline.